Session 3 and 4 taught by Dr. Reams and Black in 1977. This is tape 2 side A.
Monday, 11:40 a.m., June the 27th, 1977, Dr. Reams' Biological Theory of Ionization, session number 3 and 4, taught by Dr. Reams and Dr. John L. Black at the Murrieta Hot Springs, California. Dr. Reams gives the problem, Dr. Black explains numbers and gives information on numbers. 2-6/27-7/1-77.
You have a problem here that you had in course class 2. Now, the problem is 6, 790 over 700, 35, 4, and 12 over 12. Now, in this problem, we are not considering age, height, or weight, because whenever your body chemistry changes ranges, there is a certain patterns that takes place regardless of age, height, and weight. In other words, a certain symptom, so we're not dealing with that in this particular problem. A little later, you will have problems in which this does take place, or we're not considering such right at the moment. We're considering now the change in range and zone from range 5 to range 1. Now, this is what this third class is about. It's what takes place whenever the body chemistry changes. We call it a withdrawal. A withdrawal is a change in body chemistry. I have an emergency, and I will let John take over now, and I'll tell him what I'm doing. John, I'm explaining what happens whenever the ranges take a change from range 5 here to range 1. And they've had this in class. They've had this in the class 2, and this is class 3. In other words, we're studying what happens when the body chemistry moves toward range 1.
Now, where are you going up here?
I'll be back soon.
Going on, talking about the ranges. Since we're in here, let me go ahead and hand these things out to you. One of the crew, is there some of the people back there, Lynn or Eleanor or something? Let's hand these out because we've got the ranges out here, and we can show you how to go ahead and use this based on this example that he's got right here, and then we can begin to see. So if you will pass one of these out to all these nice people. Well, yeah. No, they're all the same. Let's go ahead now and keep passing out papers and everything. Then we'll just go through this section real carefully right here while we have it. And then if Doc is not back, we will switch over and we'll start through the eye. And we'll just keep plugging and go as far as we can, and then pick up as soon as Doc then finishes some of these points. Okay, now I have a set of this thing that is handed to you. Will be possible now that we can start on here and you can begin to utilize some of this information that you are getting to effectively determine where you are at and where these people are going. But it's going to take just a minute now until they get down these last 3 rows, and then we'll be ready to go. A, down at the bottom, is so-called perfect. Okay? Now you'll note that the salt in range A can be 6 or 7, which we already know, and that the combined ureas in range A would be 3. Okay, now there are 3 numbers that we don't know. We typed them in, and they didn't show up. So anyway, when we get there, I'll mention them to you, and you put them in. Now take a look at range B. You can see range B laying there. You can see the sugars. You can see the salt run, or the pH run, and you can see the salt run on there. And, of course, then you're in your 4M column, and then your ureas. Then you go up to range 3, which is C. You can see your ranges there, and then D, and then go up to E, okay? And then you've got a DE range. Now, this DE range is the so-called 6th range that I told you about that before that we didn't have anything on, and now this has been, we have developed these and nailed them down because of the fact that we did some computer layout as to where the break was on them, and Dr. Arrington up at Roanoke did the biggest percentage of work on these. And so anyway, up in range DE, you will note up there that you have some salts, and it says 47 salts, 45 salts, 40 and 35 salts. Up there in range DE, it's actually D. Underneath that 35, put 3.0, 4.0, and 5.0. It goes in there. Okay, in your salt range of range DE, the D part up there, on the very, very top of the page, your salt range, you've got 47, 45, 40, 35. Then under there, under that 35, put 3.0, 4.5, or excuse me, 4.0 and 5.0. So those three salt ranges also go in D, and we had it typed on one master, and evidently we goofed up and run them off of the wrong one. Yeah, write it right on your sheet. Yeah, I don't know how to make it any easier. There's a range DE up there, and there's a range D in range DE. Okay? Okay, and there's salts at the very top of the page, 47, 45, 40, 35. They're right in front of you. Now, just under that, we have to put, under 35, put down the salt range, 3.0, 4.0, and 5.0, right under the 35. There's 3 places missing under there. 3.0. Huh? No, I'm not. Let me write it out here for you so that you can see it exactly. You have a salt of 47.0. Have you got that? There's also a salt of 45.0. There's also a salt of 40.0 and a salt there of 35.0. Now I want you to write 3.0, 4.0, and 5.0. Not 30 point anything. 3.0, 4.0, and 5.0. Those are the next 3 that go in there. Now, DE is the, for lack of a better word, DE is the range that when they get in there, when they're all in DE, you can almost be willing to bet that if you can't get them out of DE, you're going to lose them. If they're setting up there in DE. Now, let's all of us work together, and let's chart this number right here, and let's say that this is a first test. Okay, and there's a sugar of 6. And here's the number, 6, 7, 9 over 7, 0, 35, 4m, and 12 over 12, which is a total of 24. Okay, let's go up your chart, and you find that your 6 is in range C. It's not in range 5, it's in range C. Now go up and find your, or look around and find your 7, 9. You'll find that your 7, 9 is in range C, so you go over here and let me move up here just a shade. So you've got your 6-0 right there, so you just put yourself a dot. Over on your range C, you've got an 8-0 and a 7-8, so you just put yourself a dot in between them because it was 7-9. Okay, then let's take a look at the next one back here. 35 is your salts. 35 on your salts is going to extend this thing, well, you're going to be right at the range of DE, so you can put your, or DC rather, you're going to put your mark right there, your dot. Now you've got a 4M, so that can be wherever. And then you've got a 24, so we go over there, and 24 is in the D range. So we can go over here and we can put it in somewhere, just a dot underneath the 25. Now what we will have, if we look at that then, is that we will have a pattern on these numbers that will go something like this. Here's the 6-0 on your chart, and it will go up to the 7-9. And then it will go over to the 35, and then it will extend upward to the 24, so that we'll have a chart on there that looks something like this. And we have these numbers. Actually, part of them are in the D range, and part of them are in the C range. Okay? Now, what does that tell us? Well, we know that we have 100% energy in the A range. 100% energy relative to our age in the A range. Now, we have approximately, and this will vary, but we've got approximately somewhere in the neighborhood of around 75% of the energy when you're in the B range. And you've got approximately 50% when you're down there in the C range. And surprisingly enough, the D range does not drop down to 25, but it does drop down below that, and from there on in, you have to really start to figure them individually. But just note that as you drop out of the A range to the B range, to the C range, to the D range, to the E range, you are beginning to lose energy, and when you get down to the DE range together, you've lost a bunch. Now, before we go any further, let's take on your chart and let's draw yourself a line between those numbers so that you've got it charted, and then let's run another test on this fellow. Now we run a test on him, and we've had him on a fast, say, for 3 days, and we come in with a sugar of 1.0. We come in with a pH. Let's say that the pH on this particular fellow has dropped down to 6.6, and the saliva is still running around 7.2, and I'll show you later how that you fit the saliva on there. We'll say that his salts are down to 9, and he's still a 4M, and that he's a 2/3. Okay, now looking at that, or we'll just put it this way, we'll just say a total of 5. Okay, now looking at that, going back over on our charting, why, we find out that that sugar range is actually up in the DE zone, isn't it? Way up at the top. So we'll go up there and we'll put a mark in up there. We see that that 6.6 is in reality way down there. That 6.6 is clear back down in the B zone. And we see that he has a 9 salt, which is also in the B zone. And that we see that he has a 4M and a total of 5. And that 5, if we go looking for it, takes us clear back up to the E zone. Now, if we draw a line between those points, our second graph on this particular guy looks like this. Now, in withdrawal, is he going to be greatly energy deficient because his system is throwing off a bunch of junk? And in withdrawal, does he feel like the world is going to drop in on him? Can he even be so sick that he starts vomiting, that he cannot handle food, that the food that you do give him is too heavy for him and he can't absorb the mineralization from it? So what's he do? He throws it back up, and his liver is trying to clear itself. So we see on the second test that as we check this particular gentleman out, that we see in the second test that actually during the withdrawal phase, he's actually losing more energy right now than he had initially. He's spread clear over a wide range, whereas initially he was setting at least in 2 ranges adjacent to one another. Now we start testing him again, and all of a sudden his sugar comes up, and on the next test it comes up to, say, 3.5. And we check him on his pHs. His pHs start to slip back up again slightly. He has a 6.9 over a 7.2. And then his salt comes back up to the point where it gets up to about 15. And then he has a 4M, of course. And his ureas get up to a 5/6. Now, as we graph this particular gentleman, we'll put those numbers on our chart, and we'll see where we come out there. 3.5, okay, that's there. 6.9 is there. 15 is there. 4M, 5/6, 11 is there. Now, if you graph across, can you see that he has come out of withdrawal and he is starting to stabilize himself and that his energy is increasing? You see how the chart's used by successive tests, one right after another one, to determine whether or not the man's energy is flagging and going away, or whether or not you're starting to stabilize him into an acceptable zone. Now, the catch of this is to eventually try to get these people into A range. If they're bad, and they've got a lot of numbers scattered around C, D, and E, and the best you can do is to get them into the D range, that's beautiful. Get them into the D range. That shows an increase of energy over having them in the C, D, and E range. Then from the D range, start to move them toward the C range, and finally toward the B range, and you can begin to see then whether or not they are leveling out and whether or not that they are actually improving on the program. Okay, now let's assume then, we can switch to a different color. Let's assume that you start out with this original test that we had, in which we had a 6.0 over a 7.9, and I don't know what the bottom was, 7.2, and there was 35.70, and there was a 35 salt, a 4M, and a 24. We'll just go 12/12. Now, making the assumption that you take this particular person and you put them on a light diet because of the fact that they cannot rest or they cannot get enough free time to go on any type of a program, Anyway, over a period, and they don't come back. You tell them that you want to test them, etc., and they do not come back, and they do not maintain their appointment with you. And so anyway, about a month later, they come strolling back in. Now, they've been gone now for a month. And in they come, and now they've got a 5.1 sugar. And during this month that they have been gone from you, their pH has dropped to a 5.4, and that high switch from an alkaline to an acid is a very frequent finding, isn't it, over a month's period of time. And on the bottom, let's say that they're up to a 7.2, and then you take note on the fact that their salts have come down to the point that their salts are now 20, and the 4M still remains, but on top of everything else, their ureas have not changed drastically. They're still 11 over maybe as high as 14, and that very frequently happens too, because as you put these people onto a program they don't come back for you to supervise them close enough, you begin putting a lot of stress on the kidneys. If you put stress on the kidneys, and the kidneys are trying to detoxify the blood, they're going to be converting a lot of waste into ammonia, and as the ammonia builds up, going through the kidneys and going from the liver back through the blood and then to the kidneys, your ammoniacal nitrogen is going to increase. Now, you go ahead and you plot this thing on your graph. And you come in here and you've got their original numbers plotted. Now you've got a 5.1, which puts you in the B zone. You've got a 5.4, which puts you right up here in the top end of the E zone. You've got a 20 for the salt, which takes you back down into the C zone. And you've got an 11 over 14, or a total of 25, that puts you up there. And then you graph that number, and you know that they have not improved on the program, that the program has actually been detrimental to them. They have actually lost energy on the program rather than gained energy. In other words, they are not a bit better. In fact, they're worse than when you saw them a month ago. Now, two things can be involved in this. Either they did not come back to you frequently enough to make it possible for you to work with them and guide their numbers back into an effective zones and into a stability, or they did not listen to you and follow the program, or they misunderstood the program, or they started out on the supplementation, ran out on it, and did not come back to get further supplementation to follow them on through. But you can see from your graph on your energy curves relative to your ranges that this particular person, in his first test, those numbers in reality look worse on this first test than they do on the test a month later. The salts are lower. You know, the ureas are about the same, but the salts are lower. Okay, the pH, for some reason, doesn't seem as drastic when it's alkaline on one side and acid on the other as it does when they're both on the alkaline side. And you know that you have a subclinical borderline diabetic starting at 6, and he is below that, so you think, well, this first set of numbers, you know, is bad. This second set of numbers is better. But in reality, when you start plotting it across the ranges, you find out that that second set of numbers, there's actually more energy loss in it than there is in the first set of numbers. Are you following with me on this and understanding how that works and how that you can use this? Okay, now can you begin to see that what he was starting to get to you? Now, he had his way of teaching, and I hope I haven't spoiled his punchline, but I made this thing up and got it available, and Dr. Harrington and I spent last Wednesday in Washington together going over some of this, and he agreed that even though he had some of the development time in it, he still wanted you people to have it, because with this simple chart, and we'll see that you get a copy of it or you can type your own up when you get home, you can run successive tests on these people and literally know if they're going to feel better or worse before you ever sit down and talk to them. You're going to know whether they have made improvements, whether they are stabilizing, or whether they're losing. Now, people go through a healing crisis. Now, let me show you something. Let's assume that let's plot another one in there. We're going to fill it up with lines. We'll get them to run us a whole bunch more down there. This was for later, and I was going to have a bunch more run, but Doc wants to cover them. Our Doc started on it this morning, so let me go through with it and cover it. Okay, now let's make an assumption. Let's make the assumption that you've got a sugar of 4.0 on this particular person, and the sugar has been staying around a 4.0 on them. And also note that they've been carrying a 7.0 pH over, let's say, a 6.8. And let's assume that they've been carrying, on a running average, a 12 for a salt, which is pretty decent. Okay, and let's also assume that they've been running a 4M, which would be evident, and let's assume that they're running a 4/6, or a total of 10. Now, if we plot that, we'll find out that this person is setting in B range. Even though those numbers don't look super, super good, actually they're not too far off base as far as, in other words, they're normal for an abnormal physiology, just about. Okay? For an abnormal physiology, a 4.0 sugar, if you're going to times that thing by 20, would give you a blood sugar of around 80 approximately, which is about normal for abnormal physiology. We have a swing range of between 6.4 to 6.6 to 6.2 down here on the pHs. Okay, well, we're just outside on the ranges for your swing ranges. A 10 or 12 salt is pretty well normal for an abnormal physiology, and ureas of 12 or under, providing they don't get too low, is just about normal for an abnormal physiology. So we look at this particular person and we see that while those numbers look bad, really energy-wise, he's at a point where that we can work pretty effectively with him, and he should have the energy to follow a program pretty good, and he should be able to continue to respond and continue to gradually pull these numbers in. Now, you've got a problem on pulling these numbers in, and that is that very frequently will take anywhere from 3 months to anywhere up to a year and a half or longer for a toxic liver to completely detoxify on a standard dietary approach. In many of the people who work diets across the country right now, they say that if the person isn't willing to spend 90 days with them, they don't want to touch them, because if they're really not going to be able to see significant improvement in under a 90-day program because of the fact that the body has a lot of rebuilding to do before it can start to go somewhere. So we look at this set of numbers and we find out that he's setting there pretty well in that B range. And all of a sudden you run a test on him and you get this. Okay? Now, can't see it? I'm sorry, it's not up high enough. My fault. Okay, now we come back here and we see that his sugar on a subsequent test, he's been doing pretty good. All of a sudden he swings up to a 7.8. All right? As we look at that chart, we see that his pH has swung clear up into the upper part of the C range. Okay? Whenever you see that pH make that swing upward, he's starting to go through another temporary crisis in his system, and he's probably going to come up susceptible to some sort of a lung problem, either a cold or a laryngitis or a sinusitis or something, because his system is becoming alkaline enough, and as his system becomes alkaline enough, his temperature is such and everything now that these bacteria can begin to set. And if you see him over a few days, if you see his pH then dropping and going down to around a 6 or below, you can be assured that he is in a second health crisis. So as you see his pHs start to jack away from where you have stabilized him, if you see them going up, he is susceptible to disease. If you see them dropping down, most frequently he is attempting to throw off something. So you can begin to watch these people from their chart, and you can begin to pick up when you can suspicion them going to have some bad days, or when you can suspicion that they're set up for a cold, or when you can suspicion that their body is throwing off more heat and energy out of its system than it needs to, and therefore it is losing ground. And of course, any time it shifts toward the acid side, you are losing a lot of energy from your system because of the fact that on the acid side, it's obvious that there's not enough calcium, there's not enough vitamin C, there's not enough of the alkaline ash elements within your system, and that the body cannot get rid of the acidity by producing stronger stomach acid, and the body cannot get rid of the acidity by breathing deeper, getting rid of more CO2, so therefore it's got to clear through the kidneys. And so as this body goes toward the acid side, you're beginning then to see this person developing a greater number of delta cells because he has a greater energy loss. Now if you will look up there and look at your DE range up at the top, do you see any alkaline pHs up there? They're all acid ranges up there. Okay? Now another thing is, as you see these pHs change and later on in the week, and I was going to cover this with you probably about Wednesday morning, but Doc evidently wanted to start with it today, so I'll be covering in some other things with this later on in the week that will tie